Good morning. My name is Dave Hershey, and I'm here at the 2017 RIMS, Risk and Information Management Society conference here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I've been asked to conduct some interviews with some fellow risk managers to help give people a little bit more of an insight about the risk management and insurance industry in general. So I'm here today joined with Jeff Hollingsworth, and I'm not going to give you a whole lot of information about that. I'm going to let Jeff speak for himself. But I think you'll find that as he goes through his experiences and his qualifications and some of the unique experiences within the risk management industry, you can't help but find it of interest, great interest. So, Jeff, maybe you can start off with a little bit, introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, maybe what you specialized in school, how you got into insurance in general.
I'd be happy to, Dave, and I welcome this opportunity to talk about risk management and the profession. So my background is in engineering. I have a degree in civil engineering from Montana State University. And as I was getting ready to graduate, I was interviewed by a firm called Factory Mutual Engineering, now known as FM Global, and took a job with them. I was offered a job out in the Seattle area and spent my first 3 years of my career learning about property risks, property insurance, how the engineering supports underwriting. And it was a completely an industry that I knew nothing about, and it wasn't really until I started working that I could see how my engineering degree could help out a company like Factory Mutual, who hires a lot of engineers.
How does it help them?
They use what they like to call engineered risks. They like to use the engineers to evaluate structural components, fire resistivity ratings, how buildings are put together, how roofs, and they use their large volumes and experience with losses to send the engineers out to say, we've seen this happen, let's identify where weaknesses are, and with your engineering background, let's help our clients build better buildings, reduce supply chain interruption, and which is a benefit not only to the policyholder, but it's good for the company.
Interesting. So you didn't know anything about any of that stuff when you got out of college?
Not a single thing.
So after you got out of college, you were essentially still learning?
I was still learning.
Interesting.
And I was introduced through colleagues like myself who Factory Mutual hired to, I didn't even realize there was a group called the Society of Fire Protection Engineers, that there's a professional engineering designation in fire protection in every state. So it was very common for the engineering graduates that worked at Factory Mutual to pursue that. So like other designations, you go through, you have to have experience and then take testing, and then if you pass, you get professional engineering recognition as a fire protection engineer. And I also participated in, that was my first real professional organization, the Society of Fire Protection Engineers. And I stayed with Factory Mutual for 4 years, did work for Boeing, a big airplane manufacturing company out of Seattle, who eventually offered me a job as a fire protection engineer for the Boeing company. So I worked on new buildings, paint hangars, flammable liquids, aircraft protection, facility protection, worked with a large group there on all these issues, and at that time I also served as the local president in the local SFPE chapter for a couple of years.
Actually, just a quick question. When you were working for FM, they provided all those services to their customers.
Yes.
So why would a company like Boeing hire people that are essentially already providing those services for them? Why would they duplicate those services and hire those people and bring them in-house? Why would they do something like that?
Because with the companies as large as Boeing, as good as the Factory Mutual engineering services were, they weren't there day to day. If there were issues that came up, especially construction projects where you needed quick answers, you wanted a quick plan review, and there was a day-to-day support for ongoing operations facilities. And FM engineering folks couldn't dig down into all the details at the very project level. It was very high level. You protect your paint hanger with a AFFF foam system. Well, the Boeing fire protection engineers saw that through with the contractors and vendors that they hired. And not only that, Boeing was protected by 3 different HPR carriers, highly protected risk carriers. We had FM, Kemper, no longer in business, and IRI, industrial risk insurers. So fire protection engineers for Boeing collected all the inspection reports and prioritized and gave clarity again within Boeing.
So it seems like you almost kind of collect data from various sources and develop sort of a best practices approach using that data, and then applying that to your own unique, characteristics of your industry or building.
Right. And when I worked for Factory Mutual, I quickly realized that not everybody does everything Factory Mutual says. So when I worked at Boeing, we would look at recommendations. If we felt that we wanted to do something in an alternate way or different or didn't want to do it, we would take our knowledge and go back to the insurer and say, we don't agree with you, or we propose this, or we want to do this. And for Boeing, it was good to get the buy-in because we didn't want to have any issues on the insurance side. So if we felt that Boeing or Factory Mutual was maybe going overboard or too redundant, or we felt there was extra cost, we would step in and we'd come to resolution with FM and the insurance part of it.
Interesting. So some of the cost effectiveness of bringing those people in-house, if you will, representing the insured, is also from a cost-cutting or efficiency perspective, from the recommendations of an insurance carrier, which is maybe a broader brush approach. Right. And then you take that broad brush approach and say, wait a minute, I understand that, but here's why there's a better way, or your recommendation won't work and are unique in particular situation.
Exactly. And the other thing is that at Boeing, the fire protection engineers worked on life safety issues, egress, smoke detection, occupancy, building codes. When issues came up with the buildings, because the Boeing buildings easily exceeded what the building codes would allow in terms of height or proximity or distance for egress, we worked on the building code issues, the NFPA 101 life safety code issues, which FM doesn't get into egress or what's the occupant load, or what's the building code classification that then gets sent to the city. So we really picked up on that part as well.
So of course I would imagine there's two benefits to that. Obviously the protection of the property, and perhaps most importantly is the protection of the employees that are working on the premises.
Exactly.
Interesting. So it seems like a lot of your activity would be what we would call in the industry pre-loss.
Yes.
Okay. So you put all that energy in up front in an effort to reduce, minimize, or eliminate the probability of a loss.
Right.
Interesting. So now, what are some of the responsibilities in your current position? If what is your current position, and how do the previous experiences, how do they assist you in doing your job currently with your current employer?
Well, when I was at Boeing, and then I went to work for a consulting company called American Risk Management, which has now evolved into Global Risk Consultants. I learned a lot more about the risk management side of the business. So I educated myself, took the ARM, Associate in Risk Management courses to learn about the field. I also I went back to college to work on my MBA, and the business side, the decision-making part, which integrated all the loss prevention, fire protection, life safety, was an exciting opportunity that I thought I would want to pursue. So I eventually had the opportunity to get a job with the Port of Seattle as their risk manager, overseeing these areas of property and casualty, working on programs like enterprise risk management, working on balancing our internal retentions of risk with what we want to transfer through insurance and other means. And when I started at the port, it took me about 2 or 3 years to kind of move some pieces around and set up and gain credibility with in-house management to the point where I could start now understanding where losses happen, what the insurance costs were, what the needs of the Port of Seattle are and were, where I thought come up with some strategies on where I thought we could really internally provide some value. So that's the part that I like about the career, is that I kind of have these functional areas that I work on, and it's also included working on our self-insured medical plans to as our company changes, and we've had different CEOs and different executive initiatives, our overall business plans to then fit what our group does or highlight certain areas that supports the overall business plans.
So you do a lot of coordination, which necessarily doesn't directly involve simply purchasing insurance.
Right.
So now, what are some of the avenues, or what are some of the exposures that a company like or an organization such as the Port of Portland face? What are some of the things that they get involved in that would come across your desk and cause you to have to, provide some review and analysis and a recommendation on protection of property and on protection of employees, and I guess with being a port, also protection of third parties, passengers.
Right. So I didn't mention when I was talking about functional areas within the risk management. It's also do a lot of contractual review, lots of leases, lots of agreements, site licenses. So the Port of Seattle, we own SeaTac International Airport and associated property and real estate and facilities in and around the airport to support those operations. We own cruise ship terminals for cruises that go up to Seattle. So we have the docks, the piers, the issues with stevedoring, marine exposures to deal with. Then we have our large container terminals, which do the import-export from large ships that come from Asia and other countries. And then we have a lot of parklands. We're very green. One of the things that the Port of Seattle really prides itself on is attention to green initiatives, recycling. When planes are parked on the runway, using electricity to run the aircraft instead of having them run their engines, likewise with ships. So I can get initiative, things can pass across my desk. Like we're looking at moving to electrical cars. So with electrical cars, you have hookups, you have different ways they sometimes start and finish. So I evaluate that from a risk management standpoint. So how do we need to educate our employees on the differences so that when they get in these electrical cars, they're going to drive safely? Because fleet safety is a big area of risk management. We have a police force, we have fire department, we have
all of which have their own vehicles.
CDL drivers. So the fleet management program, I have one person that almost solely focuses on advocating and just like safety is a day-to-day, driver fleet safety is a day-to-day thing that we work on. I get a lot of special events. One of the big event, we have what they call the Hempfest over a 3-day weekend in July on our parks property. We have 150,000 people. And I've gotten to know the organizers of the Hempfest, and it's the largest hemp festival in the United States. And it's in a landlocked park with train tracks on one side, Puget Sound on the other. It's part of it's interesting, the city owns some park, and they actually permit this event. So we can't not participate, even though the bulk of it's on our property, because the city issues the overall event permit. So we have to go along. So it's a very interesting festival. You can Google it. And it's the reason that one of the things with our parks, they get their permit because it's a freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. And they have a couple of sessions that talks about hemp, although in Washington it's now illegal from the medicine side and recreational. And then it's a large concert festival. They have a little bit of talking and a lot of music that supports the event. And once we realized we're not going to get rid of the event because the city didn't want to be sued by this Hempfest, well funded, well put together. So it was like, you know what, to make this risk management work, we're going to have to just make this event we got to get their buy-in because it's their staff. But just like you've seen at other festivals, if there's an event that happens, the landowner is going to get sued. The Indiana State Festival, where the stage collapsed in the winds a few years ago, that's an example. So those are the types of things that I can get involved with. Weddings at our local parks where they want to serve alcohol. Should we allow it? Should we not? We have bike trails. We get a few bicycle incidents that we constantly have to say, well, is there something that we need to do? Or the bicycle community will come to us and say, we want a marked crosswalk from where your park crosses a road. It could be food trucks. The airport wants to put food trucks in at the cell phone lot. We have a cell phone lot waiting area. So they want to know what are the concerns with bringing food trucks on. So I helped them sort through the regulations, what we would want from an indemnity standpoint. And I mean, over the years, my department has become a resource for these types of questions event. They want to bring comfort dogs to the airport to walk around, or they want to work lots of art exhibits. If you go through airports, you'll see exhibits, planes hanging down. Well, those exhibits are sometimes installed by small business, and their contractors don't know the rules about working on elevated platforms, or if they're spraying with some type of a chemical. So, because we encourage small business, we have to figure out ways. We don't want to do the work for them, but we need to let them know how to do it.
Why would you care? I mean, you're the airport. Somebody hires a contractor to come onto your premises. If they slip and fall or fall off their own equipment, why would you care?
Well, you didn't go to the aviation industry session yesterday, where I talked about some of these standards. One of we won't have time to go into it, but we've been the subject of a very large claim involving a ground handler who contractor works for us. Not our equipment, not our operation. They just have a license to operate. Case with got injured, sued us. What Supreme Court ruled as the airport, because we have rules and regs. We're the controlling employer. We have some method of responsibility for everybody who's on our site, even though there's a contractor who brings his own tools, means, and methods. So it's one of these things. How much control do we take? Do we hands-off approach? Well, this went to the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court didn't rule. It just said that the case could go to trial.
Yep.
So, yes, in a standard contractual situation, but we're worried about third-party overclaims. So it's the balance.
So, what I'm trying to tie this back to your college education. Okay, you know, if you graduated with a degree in engineering, okay, it seems like you've really kind of transformed from engineering into something that's a little different. Although I do see some connections,
right,
okay, where you rely on your engineering background. But it seems like in your current role as the risk manager for the Port of Seattle, your responsibilities are much greater than perhaps you anticipated as a graduating civil engineer. Well,
I think it turned out the way. There's friends, colleagues that I started with at the same time in Factor Mutual who are now one of my friends that came through the same system, same time, was just appointed as CEO of Affiliated Mutual, which is part of the FM Global system. So a lot of these colleagues have worked their ways up, and they're very, at the senior executive level with FM Global. I mean, I chose to take a path where I did different things. If I would have stayed in engineering, I'm sure I would have ended up in a spot or a role in which I had a lot more responsibility too. So I think it's whatever career path you choose, you have the opportunity to make the most of it. So yeah, I ended up someplace that was different from where I started, but it's been a great career choice, and
so that seems
I've used all my skills.
And I was going to ask you, I mean, are you happy with what you're doing now? How would you, in terms of personal satisfaction about your, job responsibilities and your ability to manage that job, where would that be on a scale of 1 to 10? What kind of satisfaction do you get?
I'd say definitely an 8. I mean, work-life balance is important. I worked for 4 companies before coming to the Port of Seattle, and as you have a family and have kids, and all of a sudden your non-work duties require presence and more involvement. You want to work for an employer that is okay with you leaving early or having to take an afternoon off. And my boss has always been very supportive. So I think if you're happy with your boss and you feel like you have some direction, say, in your work, you have a good work-life balance. The grass isn't always greener, and as you probably know, as you've seen with our colleagues here at RIMS, sometimes there's been every 2 or 3 years somebody has another new job. Well, it didn't work out. The company wasn't solid. The company had to change in direction. So, it's like if I'm happy and I feel satisfaction in the work I'm doing, why not stick with it?
Well, that's terrific. And I heard you mention that you were also a presenter here at RIMS 2017 in Philadelphia for the aviation segment. I know that there's a rigorous screening process to review your program, your qualifications before you get selected. So congratulations on having a program and a history and reputation sufficient enough to award you the ability to present here at RIMS.
I didn't know I didn't realize that there was such a criteria.
There is, yeah.
That's
and
good.
if you didn't know that and you passed it the first time through, that gives us all an idea of the attention to detail and the depth of the thought process that you apply in your everyday job. So Jeff, I can't thank you enough for taking a few minutes, talking a little bit about your career. Hopefully we can influence and bring other individuals into the insurance and risk management field, recognizing that it's an ever-evolving industry, and what you start in may not be what you finish with, which is sometimes, and in most cases, an achievement. So, again, Jeff, thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.